Welcome to Prophecy Views. I'm Brian Barton. Welcome back. We appreciate all of our subscribers and our partners and those that follow us. We really appreciate it. This ministry is starting to take on its own, and we're starting to head in the direction that we'd like to be heading. And the direction I'd like to be heading on most of our videos would be to head down the path of open source news, things that the mainstream media is not going to cover. But the difference that we're going to bring to you, the different thing that we add to it, the twist that we bring to the table is knowing what the prophecies of the Bible foretell about the times just ahead. So if you watch a lot of these open source channels, and I'm not saying don't, they're great, but you're going to notice that at the end of a lot of these videos, they have no clue what's going to happen, and we do. We have maybe not on details on every topic, but we know the general direction things are going to go, and we'll bring that into light as we move along. The first thing that I'd like to take a look at is if you would like to support our channel, you can go to Facebook and like us. You can, under Prophecy Views, you can go to YouTube. We are under Prophecy Views as well. If you'd like to support this ministry, we would urge you to find us on patreon.com as well under Prophecy Views. If you become a subscriber with us, we will send you a pair of these coffee mugs. If you become a $50 a month or more partner with us, we'll send you a pair of these coffee mugs. And we will send you a link that we're going to have coming up, a digital download, or we'll send you the DVD of this content. And I'll give you a little sneak peek on it. This is probably nothing you'll find out there like it. I'm not going to give you full details, but a little hint is it's going to be bookends of the Bible. Creation, and then we will provide the prophecy standpoint and see how the two mirror or marry, and you marry each other, and you're going to be delighted and you're going to be amazed as to how the types and shadows in creation also will be seen in prophecy. And we are so anxious about that, and we are coming up very close on putting that project together and getting it shot. The first thing that I would like to bring to your attention is the power struggle that's going on behind the scenes. And I know this coronavirus is on everybody's mind, and I totally understand. We just shot a video on that a couple of days ago, so you can check out our take on coronavirus. But if you bring it into the more of the open source news, or the behind the scenes news, if you will, there's really a power struggle going on that most people aren't aware of if they don't watch any news or only the mainstream media. It just appears on surface level that there's this pandemic going on. And but understand this. Ever since Trump was running for president, and then once he was elected, there's been nothing but an attempt to get rid of him. He is totally against the establishment, totally against the one world government. He thinks we should be a nation state, and we're going to get into that a little bit more as to where we end up lining up with that scripturally. But as soon as Donald Trump won the election, if you'll recall, there became an effort out there, unlike any other president that's ever been elected, there came this effort out there to try to get the Electoral College members to switch their votes to Hillary Clinton, which when that failed, and Trump was sworn into office, 3 hours after he was sworn into office, one of the major headlines and one of the major news organizations put it out there, and the impeachment begins. And then you'll recall the resist, resist, resist movement. And so the people that are already entrenched, deeply entrenched in our government, refuse to give up the power that they have. And so it's been a resist movement all the way through. And Donald Trump has done pretty well in spite of all of that. And that resist movement continues today, although he has been slowly draining this swamp that he talks about. But understand that there's a power struggle that goes on. But I want to give you a slightly different angle or approach to this. What power is actually controlling this United Nations that the world seems to be enamored with, and that the United States has been pushing closer and closer to just hooking in and ceding all of our power to? Who controls this United Nations? Well, actually, Understanding that, we need to go to Scripture to take a look at that. And we're going to go to Revelation chapter 13, verse 2. And this is John speaking. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon, Satan, gave him his power, his seat, and his great authority. So this tells us without a doubt who controls the spirit behind the United Nations. And we're going to prove a little more scripturally that the Bible was right 2,000 years ago when John wrote this. He could see it dead on 2,000 years ago. But if you're Satan and you want to control this, if you want to control the population, you get the population to go into a United Nations, and then you put yourself in control of the United Nations. Well, if you're Satan, what one government on the face of the earth do you have to have? Well, it's the government, it's the country that has the most economic power, is the strongest economically, and the strongest militarily. And if you can get that country in on your United Nations, that's enormous. And so the United States obviously is that country. And Satan was doing very well, because regardless if we've had a Republican or a Democrat in office since the United Nations was founded in 1945, regardless who the president has been, the Council on Foreign Relations has provided at least half of those cabinet members to every president since 1945, Republican or Democrat. Well, the whole stated purpose of the Council on Foreign Relations is to push us and let us drop our independence and give our power over to the United Nations. Their stated mission, their stated goal is to help guide the United States into the one world government. And so every president since 1945 has had their ear full of, we have to go into the one world government. Until Donald Trump came along and he said, even when he was running for office, we're going to pull away from the United Nations to one extent or another. We're going to pull back from the United Nations. NATO isn't paying their fair share. And he's pulled us out of the TPP, the Paris Climate Accord. He's pulled us out of the Human Rights Council. Now, we've remained a power at the United Nations, and I think the purpose of that is probably so that we have some control over what the United Nations does. You know, you have no say then if you totally pull out. But he's really made a lasting impression on the United Nations, and they don't like it. Not only has he pulled us out of the United Nations, but he's stood up with a lot of backbone for the nation of Israel. And we're going to see how important that is here in just a minute. But there's no other president that's had the backbone that Donald Trump has in standing up for Israel against the wishes of the United States. And they have passed resolution after resolution against the United States standing up for Israel. But without it going through the Security Council, which we then have veto power, it has no teeth when they pass it through the United Nations. But let's take a look at this because it's important. Where is the U.S. going to end up? What is the future of the United States? And if you go back in Daniel, he paints a picture of these separate beasts that are going to be on the earth at this point in time when things are starting to kind of wrap up. And he paints a picture of these entirely separate beasts. And he sees this lion with eagle's wings. Well, he watched until the eagle's wings the wings thereof were plucked and made to stand as a man. Well, that was the Declaration of Independence. That's when the United States was born. What country did we come from? The country of the lion, Great Britain. And Daniel saw this in 550 BC, 650 years before John wrote about those same beasts in Revelation. Now, when we get to Revelation, John sees the same beasts, but now they're formed as a one-world government. And so we're going to get into that in just a minute as well. But in Revelation 13, which we... let's just take a look at. And the beast which I saw, now this is Revelation 13, verse 2. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon, Satan, gave him his power, his seat, and his great authority. So as we've gone over, Satan gives the United Nations its power. But you don't see any eagle's wings here on this beast. Where are they? Well, jump back a chapter, and we're going to go to Revelation 12 and 14. Revelation 12:14 tells us where the United Nations is going to be and where we stand. Now, it's talking about the nation of Israel here when it's talking about the woman. In a couple of verses prior to this, it talks about this woman with 12 stars about her head. And those 12 stars represent the tribes of the nation of Israel. So we know for a fact that this woman that it's speaking about in this verse is the nation of Israel. And to the woman, the nation of Israel, were given 2 wings of a great eagle, the United States, that she might fly into the wilderness into her place where she is nourished by these wings of an eagle, nourished for a time, times and a half a time. And that's a final 3.5-year period leading up to the Battle of Armageddon. And it says, where she is nourished for a time, times and a half a time from the face of the serpent. So this is a very bold, this is talking about the Antichrist at this time. We are going to stand up against the face of the United Nations and against the face of the Antichrist and protect Israel when it's the hardest to do. Now, there have been presidents that people have said, like George W. Bush was a friend to Israel, and he was to some extent. But above all else, he was a globalist. The Bush family were big globalists. His dad, George H.W. Bush, started the New World Order right after the fall of the Berlin Wall. They came out and announced with Mikhail Gorbachev the birth of the New World Order. And man, did this country start going towards the UN at that time. We became big globalists at that time. And then we went through Clinton and George W. Bush, his son, George H.W. Bush's son. And then at breakneck pace, Obama took us into the United Nations by attaching us to the Paris Climate Accord and the TPP and just ceding all of our power over to the United Nations. And Donald Trump has backed us away from all of those or pulled us out altogether. One of the other questions that I've gotten over the last few days more than once is this coronavirus thing going to land us in a cashless society that's talked about in the end time, in the time of the Great Tribulation, where you won't be able to buy or sell? And as we just pointed out, between Revelation 13 and Revelation 12, where we are protecting Israel from the face of that serpent, the Antichrist, it appears to us we are not going to fall under the reign of the Antichrist. So I don't see the United States going to a cashless society anyways. Now, we are naturally a cashless society, but we still like to tip people and pay certain people with cash, and certain things are cheaper to be paid in cash because the other person doesn't want to pay the credit card charge or the fee it takes to process a credit or debit card. So in this nation, we've gone a little slower, but a lot of parts of Europe are pretty much totally cashless now anyways. So when it's time for the Antichrist to step onto the scene in the final 3.5 years, when he stands in the temple and he takes over the one world government, as Scripture tells us, he's already going to be taking over a pretty much cashless society in Europe and other parts of the world. But having said that, I don't believe we're going to be totally cashless. I will say this. I do think President Trump is working behind the scenes to either audit the Fed or to put us back on the gold standard. And he's already reappointed one of the ladies that was up. Her name was Michelle Bowman. He nominated her to go back when her term came up, nominated her back onto the Fed board. And that's a 7-member board. Now, the Federal Reserve is no more a part of the federal government than Federal Express is. The Federal Reserve is not controlled by the federal government. We do have members that sit on the board ultimately, but it's a private entity of banks and bank owners that control our currency and loan our government money from apparently out of thin air, but they loan our government money at interest, and we pay back the Federal Reserve with interest. But nobody really knows where all this money that the Fed printing money that we don't know about? Are they generating digital money that we don't know about? And Senator Rand Paul has been on the forefront of trying to get the Fed audited. Well, it appears now, my guess would be that President Trump won't announce auditing the Fed or totally pulling us out of the Fed and putting us back on the gold standard. But my guess is he won't announce that until after the elections. I don't think he wants to give them something to come at him with, any more ammunition than he has to on his reelection. So my guess is that he's probably going to do this, but it will be after the election. He's also nominated 2 more people for the Fed board. So that will give him, once these people are approved, once their nominations go through and they are appointed onto the Fed, that'll give him 3 out of 7 members on the Fed board. So all he would have to do is get 1 more person on the Fed board to go with him, and he can start getting his way on getting things done with our currency. And that's going to help us a lot. But it's just taking power away from those powers that be, this swamp, this deep state, if you will, or this cabal of people that really control things behind the scenes more than you realize. Trump has done a lot to pull us out of the UN. Trump has done a lot by, as just one example, moving our embassy from Tel Aviv over to Jerusalem at the ire of the United Nations, and they've passed resolution after resolution against it. One thing that I will mention, I do not believe then from the scriptures that we just read that we will ever see another Democrat in office, or for that matter, an establishment Republican in the White House. Now I'm talking about in the White House specifically. It doesn't speak to the Senate or the Congress in any way. But the president is the one that sets the foreign policy. And it appears that we are going to have a Trump or a political Trump lookalike from here on through. And somebody with that backbone to stand against the United Nations and back Israel. And no other president has been willing to do that. Also, one more thing I want to point out in this video is notice that the beast in Revelation is a red beast. In Revelation 17, verse 3, it says, "So he carried me away in spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman." Now this is talking about a specific church, and we'll get into that later. "But I saw a woman sit upon the scarlet-colored beast." Now notice it says scarlet-colored, a red beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. So this is the exact beast that's mentioned in Revelation 13. But he gives us a little different part of the picture here in 17, telling us that it's a red beast. Well, we know that these beasts are, these colors are spirits. And it talks about that in Revelation 6, 1 through 8, and the exact same scriptures in Zechariah 6, chapter 6, verses 1 through 8. And if you look at those 2 different scriptures on these, it's talking about the 4 horses of the apocalypse, the first 4 seals in Revelation, and in Zechariah he's talking about these 4 horses, 4 horsemen, and it's talking about Catholicism, capitalism, socialism or communism, and Islamism. Well, the red horse that is capitalism, and we'll go through this at another time, is communism. John is putting that same connotation on this horse. The UN beast he is saying is going to be a socialist beast, or a red beast, what we would call a socialist beast. Well, isn't that funny that John mentions that way back 2,000 years ago, and it is coming true today. The United Nations is very, very socialist. Europe has become very socialist in power. And socialist is the economic platform, and communism is the political platform, but it's all a red beast. Socialism is just one step away from being communist. And so we can prove that this beast, this red beast, that the United Nations is going to be socialist, and it is. It also says in 13, John prophesied that the mouth of this UN beast would be the mouth of the lion. And what is the official language of the United Nations? It is the mouth of the lion, English. They have proclaimed that back years ago, that the official language would be English. So you can just see these prophecies coming to pass. We are excited to go through these with you. So as time moves on, look for this power struggle to continue, this behind-the-scenes power struggle. Try to keep your eye on that. Like this coronavirus, it's more than just this virus that has killed less than the common flu, but yet the World Health Organization has called it a pandemic. Again, who controls the World Health Organization? And Satan gives it its power, its seat, and its great authority. So keeping that in mind, this pandemic that they call it, that is less deadly than the common virus, has caused this economic catastrophe across the world and heavily across the United States. Well, what's the one thing that they have got to knock Trump over the head with if they're going to beat him in this 2020 election? It's the economy. And so they know that they have to knock the economy down and knock it into the gutter and keep it there. Why do you think Nancy Pelosi did her best to stop this stimulus package for a while, and then her approval rating went so far into the tank and she got so many calls on it and took such a hit on it that she had to go along with it? So the stimulus package has been passed through Senate at the moment of this recording. It's up tomorrow. This is 3 o'clock in the morning, so it's up tomorrow for vote in the House. It was already passed through the Senate unanimously, 96-0, unanimous. Be passed in the House tomorrow. I'm sure in the future videos we'll probably refer to it, but it's a $2 trillion stimulus package for the U.S. And in the last couple of days, the stock market has gone up a total of over 2,500 points. And so it appears that we're going to have this V-shaped recovery where, yes, the virus brought us down, but we're going to bounce right back up. So have faith, friends, have faith that everything is fine. God is in control of all of this. You know, if God is using Trump, and I believe that he is, whether Trump is or isn't a Christian, that's between him and God. But God will use people whether they are a Christian or not. If it's somebody that God wants to use, he will get them to do the things he wants them to do. And if that is the case, no weapon formed against Trump will prosper. So keep your eye on these things. God's in control of all this. Don't worry. Just make sure that you have your salvation secured. And at that point, if something happens to you, you can say, hey, don't threaten me with heaven, right? But watch the nations that move into alignment with the UN. We know that Europe will be very tight with the UN. So you're going to be watching for nations that really tighten themselves into the UN and the nations that back away. We also know from Scripture, on a last note, that I'll point out, that we also know that Jordan will escape out of his hand, and we'll probably cover that at a future point as well. Thank you for watching. Give this video a thumbs up, like the page, subscribe, and support us at patreon.com. We look forward to seeing you again. We'll see you in the future. God bless.